jibber jab, bamboozle, nooka noozle, bippity bop, she-gall. You jibber jab, bamboozle, nooka noozle, bippity bop, she-gall. I mean, you keep on talking, but you don't know where to.
Welcome to a special edition of Independent Thinking from Channel 12 KBDI in Denver, Colorado. I'm your host today, Dave Kopel from the Independence Institute in Golden, Colorado, and we have a special guest on this internet edition from the other side of the world, Habtamu Dugo. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Now, Habtamu, you are a journalist from Ethiopia and visiting Colorado this week, talking about conditions of civil liberty and environmental problems in Ethiopia. Explain for our audience, what is the state of freedom of the press in Ethiopia?
I'll begin with the state of the state of freedom of the press in Ethiopia. When we talk about the freedom of the press in Ethiopia, we also talk about journalists. We also talk about who owns the media and whether the media is independent or not. Currently, the journalists are facing challenges, various challenges, because of the work that they do, especially if they are from the non-mainstream media, like the press, the newspapers, the independent newspapers, or if they are bloggers or online activists. The situation, the way they're treated is really severe, and there is a lot of human rights abuse against journalists. Journalists are arbitrarily arrested and then charged with charged with false charges like defamation, treason, and the charges are mostly multiple in nature. And then once a journalist serves one sentence, and then he has to go and serve the other one, or he would just stay in jail, or
so the sentences are consecutive, so maybe one sentence for treason and then another sentence for defamation and so on, so a long jail term. What kind of article would get a journalist in trouble?
Anything critical, anything that really talks about change, or anything that is deemed to be reflecting the views of the opposition, or views that actually there is a media law which was passed in 1992, and it was that proclamation actually lists the kind of crimes, and treason is amongst them, and that's the difficulty. It can be misinterpreted because it's vague and general, and that's the difficult.
So right, in the United States, of course, we have punishment for treason too, and we would think of treason as maybe the United States is fighting a war with another country, and somebody sells military secrets to the army of the other country. But how would the treason law in Ethiopia be applied to a journalist? What kind of things might be called treason?
Say, for example, if you see as a journalist somebody being beaten, and you take a picture of that person, or if you see things and you try to expose general abuses, not really violent ones, not really against the nation. People are working constructively to build a better country, and really the problem at stake here is that you can't do it, and because it is labeled a treason. It's just it doesn't have a well-founded reason, and it is just vague, and it can be misinterpreted.
So let's say you're a journalist and you find out that a government official in a town is corrupt.
Yes.
And he's stealing money that is meant to be spent for the public good, and he's keeping it for himself.
Yes.
if you wanted to publish that story, where could a journalist publish something like that?
It is on the free press. The free press is one option, but mostly you go online. But the problem is that you don't have people who have access to technology or the internet and all other things. Even if you put up information, people won't access it. But there are newspapers that are distributed in the city, and they are written in specific languages, and other people who don't understand that language won't have a chance of accessing that information. So it's pretty much journalism is for, we're talking about, say, 15% of the population is in urban areas, and the newspapers, the independent press that we have, are produced and distributed in these centers. But 85% of the population still rely on the word of mouth as a source of information, and really it is a challenge, and that's how people get access.
So 85% of the Ethiopian population is in rural areas. Boy, I guess the Ethiopian secret police are coming to get us.
Yeah.
So 85% of the population is in rural areas.
Yes, agrarian.
So where do they get their news from? You said their newspapers are not distributed there. Are there television, radio they can listen to?
Yeah, radio, I think it is a primary medium for the rural population, but there is only one state broadcaster and one state-affiliated independent broadcaster. We have the Ethiopian radio, and we have also propaganda radio station, which is called Radio Fana. And those radio stations only relay information that really talks about this development work has been done, we're doing this good job for you, and then we've drilled this well here, and it's all about development and all about the state,
and never about any of the problems the state is causing.
No,
misdeeds
you
by
can't
officials.
you can't even mention any problem. And the journalists that work for this kind of media, actually, they don't ask, and they are not allowed to ask questions. And if they are supposed to sit for a press conference with the prime minister or with anybody in government at a local or national levels, they will be given a list of questions from which they ask, and then they won't determine the next question from the response of the informant. So it's not journalism to me. Like it's shoddy, and it is so dependent and uncritical. It doesn't solve problem. It just always says it's nice.
So if you live in a rural area and you have a radio, are there other radio stations that a person can listen to besides the two government-controlled stations?
Yes. People rely on radio broadcasters from abroad, including the Voice of America, Horn of Africa services. Like there are the VOA is broadcast in 3 languages into Ethiopia. And that's actually a primary source of independent and really objective and reliable news, relatively speaking. And the other source of news or information for the rural mass is also like some broadcasts run by the diaspora.
The diaspora being the Ethiopian
Opposition,
community
yeah.
living outside of Ethiopia.
Yes, yeah, different languages but different ideologies there, but still people will get that's an alternative. Yeah, that's a real alternative.
So they might listen to a shortwave station broadcast from Germany, for example, by Ethiopians living there. But now, does the government try to jam those broadcasts from either the diaspora or from Voice of America?
Yes, they do. And in fact, what happened was it was at some point in time after the 2005 elections, even the VOA services were blocked and jammed, and all you could find is buzz. And and it is jammed, yes. And in fact, it's not only jamming, but also foreign journalists are arbitrarily arrested and then disposes their press cards and all that, and there are areas where you can't go into. And one important point to make here is that when you talk about the broadcasts from the diaspora, it is very risky, and it can land you in jail if you are found listening to something that is classified as anti-government, which in reality, you know, like it is just being constructive. It's not like, it doesn't encourage violent thinking. It just encourages the flourishing of democracy and freedom in that country, in most of the things, not all of them. So that's pretty dangerous to listen, but you must do it in secret, and you must do it on a very low volume, or if your neighborhood is a supporter of the regime and you are discovered, and then you'll be in trouble.
So in everything from the diaspora radio stations and the Voice of America, that's you go to jail if you were caught listening to those.
Yeah, especially the diaspora ones. The Voice of America, of course, they jam it because they can't jail you, and when it's investigated and people find out that they were imprisoned for listening to the VOA, it won't be a good news for the government. So
which has a friendly relationship with the United States government.
Yes, yes.
So what about television? What television is available in Ethiopia?
There is only one TV station, which is called Ethiopian Television. It broadcasts in 3 languages, and they're starting one more language or 2 of the Somali, and it's pretty much like you know, it's just a propaganda. It really is speaking. It's a propaganda machine. I mean,
can you get TV stations from anywhere else if you have a TV set?
It depends on your status and your income. If you are able to afford to buy a satellite, subscribe to a satellite station, or buy a decoder, like say DSTV, or like you can get TV channels like the British Broadcasting Corporation or the CNN,
and what fraction of the population can afford to buy a satellite dish and a subscription?
Really insignificant, and it is really insignificant, less than 0 point something.
Okay, but the government won't. You don't get in trouble with the government if you have a satellite dish.
No, you don't. But if you have a satellite dish, and then, for example, there are broadcasts from Eritrea, which are run by opposition, you know.
Right,
and that's where you run into trouble. If you are found accessing things that are classified as opposition and subversive, and then that's...
Right, and just to let our internet viewers know who don't know all their Ethiopian history, that Eritrea used to be an independent nation, was then conquered by Ethiopia, and then fought a war of liberation, and has again become an independent nation. So if you're listening to Eritrean TV, that's a big problem if you get caught in Ethiopia.
Yes. Yeah, I didn't listen to an Eritrean TV myself, but I know that people were hiding when they do listen to Eritrean TV, which is actually... It generally is a counter propaganda. So, you know, like it's the state broadcasts something from here, and then there's something that's countering what they're saying. So it's like...
It's government propaganda too, just from a different government.
Yes, but they also have they have allotted time, airtime to our oppositions that are hosted there. But yeah, I mean, almost they have the same records.
So now, people in the United States, very few of them know about the ethnic divisions in Ethiopia, and talk about that, about explain who are the ruling groups, and then who are the opposition groups who want peaceful change and a fairer government.
Okay. Yes, and the country is a very diverse country with over 17 languages and tribes, and this is not often talked about, and what is represented is as if the country is one, as if the country speaks one language and has one religion or one ideology, and that is pretty much dangerous, because in a diverse country you must celebrate plurality, and you don't see that happen. And when talking about what kind of oppositions that we have, ethnicity is actually very much manipulated by the current regime. It's important to make this point, because people, tribes are pitted against each other, and then once they are pitted against each other, tribe A fights tribe B, and then if the tribe A is from the ruling party, and then the ruling party will be siding with tribe in crushing tribe B. So especially this has been very common in the tribes in the southern part of Ethiopia, including the Oromo, the Afar, the Anuak, and the Sidama, and the Nuer in the western Gambela area, which are marginalized and denied voice and representation in the national government and local governments. So the state follows ethnic federalism. The constitution, it states clearly that we have 9 regional states, but it doesn't celebrate diversity. It just manipulates your difference to make you each other's enemy. And I feel some danger in there, because it doesn't solve the real problem of giving people freedom, liberty. But what it does is it amplifies the sense of your individual identity, and then you develop intolerance for other people, and that's very common, especially with tribes from the ruling, the Tigrayan, or rather, I should say, from the ruling party, the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front.
So, for example, you're from the Oromo tribe, which is,
yes,
has 30 million people.
Yes.
And is not part of not favored by the government these days.
Yes.
What does that mean in practice for the Oromo people? How are they mistreated by the government?
Yeah, if you ask any average Oromo on the street, and I would tell you, or should tell you, that he doesn't feel he or she is a citizen of that country, or people think they're secondary citizens, and then that sense of belonging itself has been eroded because of that repression, that oppression, and this is done while in reality most of the producers and the economy of the country it comes from the Oromia state, which also geographically it's a big region as well, and it's also got more population in terms of human resources. So
what are some practical ways in which an Oromo person would not be treated equally by the central government?
Okay, the practical ways are like if you go to apply for a job is reserved for someone, and say you're applied for a job, and in fact we were 2 or 3 of us were Oromo, and then one of my friends was a gold medalist, actually, a very bright guy, and
academic honors.
Yes, academic honors. But because of job preservation, the 3 of us didn't get any job, but our grades are better than the other students there. But there is job preservation. It's very clear, and then you, as an Oromo person, it's very hard for you to move in and out of the country. Your rights of movement are also very restricted, and then you are not issued passports and visas. It's really very tough,
And you were able to come to the United States because you were in South Africa, because you had been studying in South Africa.
Yes, I've been studying there, and I could process as my passport through a U.S. embassy.
Okay. Let's talk about one of the big problems in Africa, in lots of the independent African nations, has been people who maybe become elected president one time and then they make themselves dictator for life.
Yes.
Tell the audience about the traditional Oromo solution to that problem, what in America we would call term limits.
Okay. It's the traditional Oromo system, which is now actually out of use, or is by the state doesn't care about it. It's ignored and it's sidelined. But the way it works is it is called the Gada system. It is as an age system. It used to be an age system. There are also areas where it is happening now. But in that system, basically, it is a system of governance. It does also have a cultural and whatever in it. But in its section of governance, one would be elected when one is mature, say like about from 42 or something. To be an Abagada or a leader, you need to be mature and self-actualized and experience it. And then you only stay for 8 years, and after 8 years, another Abagada or something like a president, you know,
Yes.
would take. And then there is a council. Decisions are not made by the Abagada himself. It is made by the council, which he hates. And then he's also, you know, restricted. So, but I think this is a very useful. It could provide a very useful basis to build a modern democracy on it, because you can't purely have a system that, like, say, its only defect is like it's not accommodating of women. So. Women leaders.
Yes. But this was a system that existed until the 19th
yes,
century.
Yeah, it's an ancient system,
yes.
So it's just patriarchal.
Right.
Yeah.
If someone is interested in getting accurate news from about Ethiopia, about Oromia, your region, where are some places on the internet to go for truthful journalistic reporting?
On the internet, you can, like, say, look up. Really, it's truthful information is difficult to get, but relatively speaking, you can get it online if you have access to things. But I would rather say it's hard to find a reliable resource, but the resources from the diaspora, the websites, publications online, that there are real alternatives, you know.
But I guess they have the difficulty that the people who are in Ethiopia can't report very easily, and then the websites that host this information, they're based in the United Kingdom or the United States,
yes.
or Germany, so the people there can't know the day-to-day conditions of what's going on in Ethiopia.
Yes, the problem is, like, you can't, unless you have reporters on the ground, and then those reporters are allowed to gather stories or news. You can't have, like, an objective and really professional journalism from the diaspora as well, because you need to take pictures and you have to be there and you must feel things as they are happening, you know.
Now you've done some reporting from Ethiopia,
yes,
putting yourself at risk by reporting stories, and then I believe in the Sudan Tribune
yes,
is one of them, which is not published in Sudan, of course, because they have no freedom at all there.
yes.
So how do you go about doing that? How do you write the story and then get it out to the broader world?
Actually, you know, like the Sudan Tribune itself, I was communicating with the editor of the Sudan Tribune, and he was telling me, I didn't know if it were based in Sudan, but it's not based in Sudan, it is based outside. It is that's what he told me.
Yeah.
And they publish from diaspora because they also criticize that the Northern Sudan.
So you were able to communicate with them by
you email them, You email your stories. You write up stories or opinion pieces, and then you email them, and they will publish it for you. And if you have if you want to comment on some stories that are online already, you just need to subscribe and sign in, and
you have to do this from an internet cafe in a big city?
Yes. Yes.
And what happens if somebody walks by and sees you writing an article criticizing the government, or reading an article criticizing the government on
Yeah,
your
the whole
computer
time,
screen.
the whole time you were there trying to compose something, you are cautious and you are nervous and you look around because you know the risk involved, and in fact, the telecommunication sector itself is not a free system. You can be your IP address can be traced and you can be traced down to where you are, and then in fact you are required to leave your details with the internet cafe owners, and they submit it to security officials daily, on a daily basis. If they don't comply with that, they will be shut down and be out of business. So it involves, the risk involves you, them,
Yeah.
and it is tough, you know, but you also are in dilemma, like you feel you've seen something happen, but you want to talk about it. So you need to talk about it anyway, because even if it means like someone is going to do something to you, something harmful to you.
And so you've written, for example, about persecution of Oromo students at universities.
Yes, I did.
Well, thank you all very much for watching this special edition of Independent Thinking. Besides the Sudan Tribune, I just want to give listeners some quick ideas for other places they can go for information. Some of the websites where you have published that have been good.
I've actually the very good way of accessing my stories is by Googling Karen Sobia on Google, and you can go to different websites, but Sudan Tribune is the most area.
And Karen Sobia is the pseudonym
yes,
you
there
use
is also
to write.
like a portal called Gada.com, and there are websites that are also run by other oppositions.
Great. Well, and folks, if you want to, just in case you didn't get all that written down, come to the Independence Institute website, and we will provide links to those and have some information from Mr. Dugo's speech to the Independence Institute, a podcast with him, and lots of other information for resources so that you can keep up to date with what's going on in this global struggle for freedom in Africa and around the world. Thanks for listening.
You jibber jab, bamboozle, nuka, noozle, bippity bop, she-gall. You jibber jab, bamboozle, nuka, noozle, bippity bop, she-gall. I mean, you keep on talking, but you don't know where to turn it